Another Telegraph scoop. We reveal the truth about the Chinese super embassy, which will contain 208 secret rooms, one of them just 1 metre away from vital British cables.
We speak to Sir Iain Duncan Smith, China hawk, sanctioned by the communist regime, who says the Prime Minister Keir Starmer has lied and lied and lied to the public about this proposal.
Every denial that the government has made to us about the usage, the location, and the communications cables is an absolute unmitigated lie. They have lied their way through this process from start to finish, and there will almost certainly be a judicial review of the way they behaved on this, because this has broken every rule in the book when it comes to planning on this.
One of our Telegraph colleagues has got hold of the unredacted plans for China's super embassy in London.
Whoop, whoop. Scoop alert.
Which reveals a hidden chamber that would sit right next to where some of Britain's most sensitive communication cables run. That room would sit within a network of 208 secret underground rooms, which could then be used to tap into financial data and email and messaging traffic for millions of internet users. Now, most of the basement level of the super embassy in the plans was redacted so that people couldn't see it, supposedly for security reasons. And despite all of this fishy stuff going on, Keir Starmer is still expected to approve these plans ahead of a visit to China later this month to meet President Xi Jinping. Well, we're joined by Gareth Corfield, the Telegraph journalist who got hold of these unredacted plans. Gareth, you and the video producer Louis Brady have put together a video on this, which you can watch right now on the Telegraph's YouTube channel. And we're going to listen now to you talking about those critical cables that would run just 1 metre away from a secret room in China's super embassy.
Those cables are in fact right beneath me, about 50 centimetres or 18 inches under my feet. And to my right, that wall is the edge of the proposed Chinese embassy site, with a basement running directly underneath it, and which is redacted on China's plans. Now, we measure this distance from the access chamber here to the embassy, exactly 100 centimetres. And what is even more concerning is that we know from the plans that China intends to demolish parts of the basement and its surrounding walls. This means their workmen will be digging right next to these cables.
So, Gareth, an extensive investigation by you. I know you've been working on this for many weeks. Just go into a bit more detail about what these unredacted plans actually show.
So what these plans show us is just how close China's basement comes in the embassy building to the fibre optic cables that run alongside it. Now, although we knew previously that generally there were cables somewhere nearby and it was a potential security risk, we didn't know until now that they were coming within 1.7 metres of these cables. And not only that, but that they would be demolishing and rebuilding the underground wall directly next to the cables themselves. So it's not only that they're close to them, but they're close to them and they're out of sight of the authorities, so we cannot actually see what it is the Chinese will be doing during their construction works there. We also know from the plans that there are hot air extracting systems that will be installed in the basement, one at either end. That is the sort of equipment you install if you've got a large number of, for example, computer servers in there.
Yeah.
And if you're running a sort of national-grade espionage station, you'd have a lot of computers which generate a lot of heat, a lot of hot air, and that needs to be removed.
Just a quick one on that, Gareth. I mean, some might argue, look, you're leaping to some extraordinary conclusions here. OK, yes, this room is in very close proximity to cables that run data from the City of London to the rest of the country, if not the world, but you haven't actually got any concrete evidence at all that spying is likely to take place in this basement.
Well, it would be a lovely thing if we did have a smoking gun of a Chinese spy caught in the act.
Yeah.
If the plans actually read spy room here.
That would be good.
That would be the ideal, wouldn't it? You know?
I mean, I can appreciate why you've jumped to the conclusion you have, and I think it's a perfectly logical one, not least because of what we know in recent times about the Chinese spying scandal and the collapse of that case and all the rest of it. And let's be honest, the country has got quite an illustrious history when it comes to spying on its friends as well as its enemies. But what's the most disturbing aspect of this story? It's this idea of the close proximity, but the wall demolition is so suspicious, isn't it?
That's exactly it. If you're just refitting the building and you're gutting it and putting up new partitions and paintings of the dear leader and so on, that's one thing. But when you're demolishing the exterior parts directly next to sensitive communications infrastructure, maybe it is an innocent thing. Maybe the wall is worn out and it needs to be replaced. Perhaps they're putting a gym and a sauna down in the basement. But given China's track record, and indeed our own track record in the West doing this sort of thing, there is, it's suspicious and it's a risk. And I suggest that it's a risk that the government has not really looked at closely for whatever reason that might be.
Can you tell us something about these cables, who they serve, what might one be able to tap into if you were able to do so?
So these cables run between the City of London and Canary Wharf, the sort of Docklands financial complex down there. And if you trace them further out, they go west to the big data centre complexes in Slough, and from Slough they go to the rest of the world. They tap into the transatlantic links to America, and so on. What you're getting at the Royal Mint Court site is the bottleneck, the vital bottleneck, where all of these different parts come together as they plug into Canary Wharf. So if you can tap into that, you are spying on, obviously, all of the British financial traffic. You're spying on, potentially, the government departments based in Canary Wharf in Docklands, down in Westferry. You're potentially getting a tap into the data traffic going from Europe, from Brussels and places like that, across to America, via our transatlantic cables down from Cornwall in Bude. It really is the jugular vein of the internet as it passes through Britain, I would say, at that location.
What's curious about all this is obviously the unredacted plans are new to us because the public hadn't had the chance to see them until you wrote this brilliant expose, Gareth. The security services and the police and others have seen them. They must have seen them, right, do we think?
That's an interesting question. We know that just before a certain national newspaper prompted her departure from government, Angela Rayner had publicly demanded that the Chinese show copies of the unredacted plans to her department, the Ministry of Housing, Community and Local Affairs, local government, whatever it is. And what we don't know, obviously, as her departure from government last August indicated, was what the Chinese response to that was. Now, I'm told that when the Conservatives were in power, they made a similar request through the normal channels behind closed doors. And what they got back was essentially the redacted plans again, but zoomed in slightly. And that doesn't really suggest that there's a great deal of candour or openness on the Chinese side here.
Why I ask that is because I've interviewed successive ministers who've had some involvement in this and questioned why on earth they are allowing this super embassy to go ahead. Not least because it's enormous and it's on a historic site, but also because of these continued rumours about underground chambers and spy tunnels and close proximity to our cables. And the reason that's always given back to me is, oh, well, the police and the security services are okay with it. And I'm like, well, can they be? And if they are, have they been party to all of the information? One wonders, Gareth, if your reporting might be placed under the noses of those down the river at MI5 or beyond, and there may need to be a rethink.
Well, quite. I mean, I gather that the security services were not happy when the Chinese bought the site in 2018. I think it was sort of 255 million they spent on it. And that objections were, again, behind closed doors, quietly raised with the government today to say, is this a wise idea letting the Chinese set up shop at this location, given the communications cables that run directly on their doorstep in a very literal sense? And that's, again, this is sort of the rumours and the hearsay and the whispers on which our weird and wonderful world operates. But I gather that although those objections were heard, ultimately a political decision or a series of political decisions were made as sort of brush that under the carpet and say, well, we've got a greater priority here. Chinese diplomatic engagement is deeply important to us. And there's also the dimension where the Chinese, I'm told, are trying to play quid pro quo with our embassy in Beijing.
Yes.
We want to expand our embassy in Beijing, and the Chinese are saying, well, we're going to make that a condition of you approving our mega embassy. Tit for tat.
Although there isn't equivalence there, because this embassy in the UK that it's proposed is far, far bigger than, well, apparently any other embassy, but also our plans for Beijing.
It will, yes, the Chinese one over here in London will certainly be the biggest in Europe if completed. I think the site is 5.5 acres or 22,000 square metres big. It's substantial, and it's going to have accommodation for 200 people living in there as well. Our presence in Beijing is nowhere near that scale. It is, if you're standing on the street and looking at it, I gather it would be a big building, just as any other building would be. But we're not talking about, essentially an apartment complex with integrated offices and an underground car park and a network of basements and tunnels and bathrooms, even lift shafts, all sorts of equipment where you would have a lot of people living in one place for a very long time.
Yes. Why would you need people living there overnight, Tim? Unless they were up to no good.
Well, that's the Hotel California. They would never leave, would they? That's the thing, is that the scale of the plans are not just arrogant, but suspicious as well, aren't they?
Yes.
Because you normally expect large numbers of staff to live elsewhere. Why do Chinese personnel have to live on site?
No, they don't.
As if they're carving out a little bit of China in the middle of London.
The whole thing absolutely stinks. Do we think Starmer might be minded to change his mind? As you mentioned earlier, the Telegraph was responsible, in part, for the departure of the Deputy Prime Minister. Could we change minds on this
That was
too?
also over a planning issue.
It was too. We're good at...
Well, it was over a house purchase issue.
When it comes to planning, the Telegraph appears to be the most...
Every time an MP clicks on right move, we're there.
We're there. Yeah, that's because we're on a par with estate agents in the popularity stakes. But back to the case in point, Gareth, do we think this newspaper may again have moved the dial on this issue?
I like to believe that we have moved the dial. I have certainly heard that a lot of existing government narratives around this, including such claims as there are no sensitive cables here and there's nothing to worry about, which is a line given to other newspapers who reported this story previously in the past. That all seems to have been blown out of the water by this, because nobody's ever sat down, looked at this and figured out these are where specific cables owned by specific companies run, and this is how close they are to the embassy. Now that we have published these details and they're out there for everyone, I really do like to think that some sensible people are going to have a quiet word with Labour behind the scenes and say, look, now it's all out there, everyone knows what we've known between ourselves, you really can't carry on like this anymore, you've got to be seen to be doing something.
I imagine that M might be on the phone to PM momentarily.
I think M is PC now, which is why that sort of thing doesn't happen.
Oh, really?
We hear from the government.
Go on then, yeah.
The government has
let's
said
hear
national
this.
security is our first duty. And government security experts have been involved throughout the process so far. Why do their statements always sound like they're about to say, if you want to hear more, press 1?
Yes.
As the Home Office and Foreign Office have previously set out, all the security implications of the planning application have been identified and addressed. An independent planning decision will be made by the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government in due course. China's London Embassy did not respond to requests for comment, but presumably it is listening next door with a glass to the wall.
And just to update you there, I did in fact get a response late last night. I shall read it in full. It says, "Good evening. Sorry for the late reply. We have stated our position more than once. The position remains unchanged. Yours sincerely."
That's from the Chinese embassy.
And that is from the Chinese embassy.
That's more like it.
Isn't
I
it?
think I prefer that.
Straight to the point.
I don't know what their position is, but I'm glad that they're sticking to it.
Yes.
Gareth, thank you very much indeed for joining us on the Daily Tea, and congratulations on your brilliant scoop.
Camilla, thank you very much.
So Iain Duncan Smith, thank you for joining us on the Daily Tea, friend to this podcast, famed China hawk, sanctioned by the regime. You must have read today's Telegraph splash with a degree of horror, although not perhaps surprise.
Well, not really. I did actually see it yesterday evening, so I was a little bit more in advance than today. Bear in mind that there's been a row about the plans that China had for this site. They were redacted. The government had asked them to unredact them, and they refused. And this has been going on for some time. There's something else that they've refused during the course of this planning process, which is critical. The government said that the deal would be they would have this site and they would close down their embassy site that existed, and they said no. So this has been going on for some time. So every time the government's asked them to do something within their planning requirements, they've literally, by and large, rejected it. So this has been extracted. And I take my hat off to the Telegraph for having got hold of it and for having published it. But it shows that every denial that the government has made to us about the usage, the location, and the communications cables is an absolute unmitigated lie. They have lied their way through this process from start to finish. And there will almost certainly be a judicial review of the way they behaved on this, because this has broken every rule in the book when it comes to planning on this. The cables are there. For some reason, the MFI were encouraged to say they didn't have a problem. They never said they weren't. They just said that they didn't. They thought they could deal with this. But the reality is they were there. The government denied these cablings important. We knew very well that previously that 2 other banking organizations had occupied the site, so the cabling went straight through into the site. This nonsense about denial after denial after denial is completely ridiculous, but it's been very bad. And this government's been the worst. The previous government also was happy to see them have it, and we fought that as well. But this government has bent over backwards for the Chinese to have this site. There's no reason for it. When the Americans wanted a much enlarged site, they went south of the river to an area that doesn't have this sort of problem of confluence of issues, etc., that exist with the city, with MI5 and MI6 on the cabling run, the Canary Wharf, all these sort of things. Plus also it's right in a tourist attraction, right smack bang opposite the Tower of London. And it occupies, this is the most horrific part of it, I think, it occupies a very important site for our history, which is to do with the concept of our currency. I mean, it's just quite ridiculous. So I take my hat off to the Telegraph. Well done yet again for having got this, because it really opens up the debate again.
So, Iain, how do the Chinese keep getting away with this sort of thing? And why do British governments let them do it?
Well, I think the whole problem is that China has become quite dominant in global marketplaces, and because they become one of the greatest manufacturers and producers of equipment, of technology, etc. They've done that for a variety of ways. Some of it has been through massive subsidization against the WTO rules. The other side of it has been they use slave labor regularly in a lot of their manufactured products, which means they are definitely by nature cheaper. Solar arrays, batteries, you name it. They make a lot of it through slave labor. And finally, of course, successive British governments, in pursuit of trade, have chased after this elusive Chinese deal that they want. Remember the golden decade under Osborne and Cameron, which I thought was ridiculous. I think the officials actually called it Project Kowtow, but it was certainly what I referred to as Project Kowtow. On bended knee, please China, give us something. And this government has pursued it on steroids. I mean, it's quite ridiculous. There's literally nothing that they won't give to the Chinese to get some fabled trade arrangement, which will basically lead only to one thing. China will dump all of their overproduced cars, batteries, solar arrays, because they've carried on manufacturing at a rate where the economy was growing at over 5%. But we know the domestic economy has crashed. And so there isn't the demand domestically. So they are now determined to dump goods elsewhere. And we'll be opening the door for that. We won't have a steel industry left. We won't have a car industry left by the time they're finished. But of course, the government will be happy because we will have trade, and that noticeably will help their growth, they think, and it's not going to.
You mentioned judicial review earlier. Feasibly, if Keir Starmer is minded to give this the green light, regardless of the expose that the Telegraph has orchestrated today, can anything be done to stop it? What can parliamentarians do if the Labour government is intent on allowing this to go ahead?
Well, bear in mind, it's not just about parliamentarians. There are 200 residents, British citizens, resident on the site. There is also an ex-monastery, an Cistercian monastery site, which exists on the site. And they were told to make open access to that. And there's real questions about how those residents will be able to get to and fro. None of that was settled within this process. And they simply rejected any of the observations that the government made. So it will be the residents, I suspect, who have the full right to challenge this, because we need to get to the bottom of this. Remember, before the last election, in exasperation, the Chinese administration said, President Xi himself, I think, said, that they would not bother, after they got turned down by Tower Hamlets, they would not bother to put in another application unless they had the assurance that it would succeed. Labour gets into government, and then all of a sudden, they put in their second planning application. Now, bear that in mind for a second. When you see that last year, Starmer sat at a table with President Xi, and what was the first thing he said to him before the cameras were cleared away by President Xi? You will be pleased to see that we have called the planning system of the embassy in. Now, how in hell's name would President Xi know anything at all about our planning processes if he hadn't already been told the plan ahead was to call it in so that it overrides any local government decision-making in any degree at all? And that's the whole thing, is connecting together from the word go. You can see what they were determined to do by hell or high water was to give the Chinese this mega embassy on bended knee in the hope they will get their trade arrangement.
given that Keir Starmer is going to be going to China, it feels very unlikely that he's going to. He's up for a row with Xi over this issue.
No.
If it does go, assuming it does go ahead, and it looks a lot like the plans that we've got the unredacted version of, what are the security implications? What does it mean for Britain if it greenlights this embassy?
Well, first of all, I think is that the Five Eyes won't trust us. America's opposed to this. Australia and others have all made objections to the location of the site and to where, as I said earlier on, the security issues around cabling. I think it shows that we're not serious about the threats. I mean, just go back only a couple of months, 2 or 3 months. China was there, this big thing in China where they had North Korea and Russia. Putin was there, and he had them arm in arm. And he said publicly, we are on the verge of creating a new world order. China knows exactly what it wants. It wants, at the end of the day, to get rid of the nonsense of democracy and these free courts and human rights. They want their form of government. He's never shied away from telling us the only form of government that works is his form of government, dictatorship, control through their communist system. And the same goes, as you see, Russia has moved massively back towards that process. They're linked together. North Korea is involved in it. Iran, of course, right now is supported heavily by China, who buys huge amounts of oil from them. And so what we are seeing right now is that we have opened our door to a regime that literally wants to see all that we believe in swept aside. All the platitudes and the trade doesn't add up to anything when you compare it against what their ambitions are. Look at them over Taiwan. You have to look at the way they begin to dominate in Southeast Asia. And we have been stupid enough, government after government, to run to them in the hope that they will help us. They have no interest in helping us. They're about helping themselves. And if we don't know that, that is the biggest threat we face now. They will use their new power. 200 extra spies in that embassy are going to be rotated. They threaten the Hong Kong dissidents daily. They put bounties on their damn heads. They've sanctioned people like me because we believe in free speech. All of this is what they do now before they get this super embassy. You watch what happens when they get the super embassy. They will be everywhere. Look what happened in the compound up in Manchester when they disagreed with those dissidents outside. They dragged one of them in and beat him up. And because they were on the compound, the British government did nothing about it, absolutely nothing. It was weak and pathetic, and the Chinese eventually quietly sent those officials home and put some new ones in. No apologies, nothing. That's only a foretaste of what is to come.
Sir Iain Duncan Smith, a stark warning. Thank you very, very much for joining us on the Daily Tea.
My pleasure.
Iain Duncan Smith's critics say, he's a China hawk, he's completely bonkers, goes completely off the reservation about this. But we were discussing, weren't we, having read Young Chang, the author of Wild Swans, that extraordinary expose of the Cultural Revolution in China, write for The Spectator over Christmas, and say, don't be under any illusions. President Xi is the next Mao. The tactic, the playbook, everything that he's working towards is this. So that whole golden era now looks so embarrassing, I think. Courting, I remember covering the state banquet. The only state banquet, famously, that Jeremy Corbyn wanted to don the white tie and tails to attend. President Xi in town, his fellow communist.
I think, to be fair to the British establishment, boo hiss, there was a period in the 90s and early 90s when it did look like those countries were moving towards Western-style democracy via free market transformation. So Deng Xiaoping, Jiang Zemin, I think they did want a more liberal order in China, but partly as a consequence of the credit crunch, of the general economic and political turmoil of the 2010s. Vladimir Putin begins to crack down in the 2010s, and he does this sort of famous deal with the Orthodox Church of you back me and sacramentalize my regime, and in return I will become a great Russian nationalist and things like that. So there's a very cynical about turn from those regimes. One listener to this show wrote in to ask me, why do the British establishment insist upon saying Russia bad, China good, when the reality is they're not just as bad as each other, they are hand in glove?
Yeah.
And that's the curious thing about this. Keir Starmer, I feel, sometimes wants to rhetorically put all the emphasis upon we've got to stop the Russian bear, which somewhat disguises the fact that we're cozying up to the Chinese dragon.
Yeah.
But actually, they find unity in things like Iran and Venezuela. We should be treating the two as equally as much of a challenge to us.
If you're enjoying our journalism, why not sign up to From the Editor, our free email newsletter? Start your day with the latest news and opinion, plus our bite-sized puzzles. Scan the QR code to sign up free today.